Hey everyone, welcome to another top 10 list. This week's top 10 list kind of bounces off of what last week's top 10 list was. This week's top 10 list is series with names. Now, last week I did notes that had specific names, and some of you guys were like, oh, you forgot this, oh, you forgot that. And what you brought up were not individual notes, but entire series that had very specific names. That is this week's top 10. So, I didn't forget. Actually, there was one or two that I did miss. I did miss the Technicolor $20 gold certificate from 1908. That should have definitely been on last week's list, but that's neither here nor there. This week we're talking about series with names. All right, number 10. This week we're going to start off with the Nationals. There are two types of nationals, actually. There is the small size national and there is the large size national. You can see the difference in size right there, of course. Now, the main difference between the two is the year published. As you know, anything after 1928 would be a small size note. Anything before then would be the large. Now, nationals, you can see on the top it does say national currency. It says that on the small as well, national currency. What these are bills that were put out by specific banks. The treasurer would go to a bank, and they would make sure the bank was solvent. If the bank was solvent, the bank could put money on deposit, and they would be given a charter number and national status. So, for instance, in this case, the Eau Claire National Bank got a charter number. They were able to put money on deposit, and bills were printed that said the Eau Claire National Bank will pay, because they were the ones backing this from, of course, Eau Claire, Wisconsin. And the small size, same thing here. The charter number you can see right here, this one is the First Wisconsin National Bank of Milwaukee. Now, these all teeter on the whole First National Bank thing that I've talked about before. Whatever bank in any given city was the first bank to be given the national title, that's where you got First National Bank. Every town's got a First National Bank, and you can understand why it was so important to have the first designation. So when people talk about nationals, they are talking about notes that are backed by actual banks rather than by the federal government. So that's number 10 on my list, nationals. Number 9. Confederate notes. Yes, Confederate notes are their own series. As soon as you say Confederate notes, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. Talking about notes from the Confederate States of America during the Civil War. They did make denominations of 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, and this one here is the 500, just a replica. But anyway, those are all the different denominations for the Confederate States of America. Sometimes you'll hear them called C of A or CSAs, Confederate States of America is what that would be, CSA. Now, a CSA, of course, was issued by the Confederate States, and they have a neat obligation, which was the fact that, here you can read it on the top of this one. The obligation on this reads 2 years after the ratification of a treaty of peace between the Confederate States and the United States. So, in other words, this wasn't redeemed until 2 years after the Confederate States won the war. Of course, Confederate States didn't win the war, thus making these pretty much kindling. People would end up burning these to heat their house. But yeah, someone says CSA, that's Confederate States of America. Confederate notes, that's number 9 on my list. Number 8, from the same time period, just the other side, we've got fractional currency. Fractional currency or postal currency, those terms are interchangeable. During the Civil War, finding change was pretty tough to do. So they made numerous denominations of change throughout the course of the Civil War and for the years after, because it was still tough to get change back into circulation. You would end up with denominations of fractional currency starting as low as 3 cents and going all the way to 50 cents. They had some oddball denominations as well. There was a 15 cent, I believe there was a 20 cent as well. So just some unusual denominations that you'd see, especially the 3 cent. That one kind of makes everybody's head scratch a little bit. So the different denominations, and of course all being put out through a number of years. Now the first series of these were put out, well, most of them were put out by the post office, but they were put out through the post office and designed to look like stamps. That's why they were called postage currency or postal currency. And then once they started assuming the seal, like this one has, that's when they became known as just fractional currency. But it's all the same thing. So that is number 8 on my list, fractional currency or postal currency. Number 7. From one war to another. This is from World War II. This is known as emergency currency. When you say emergency currency, people automatically think of World War II. And oddly enough, there are other notes that are known as emergency currency when you dig deep into their backgrounds. But for the most part, when people say emergency currency, they're referring to either these notes here, which is the North Africa notes, the silver certificates from North Africa during World War II, or they're referring to the Federal Reserve notes from Hawaii at the same time period. Now, this one here has the yellow seal. That's how you know it's the North Africa note. The Hawaii note is going to say Hawaii here. It's going to have a brown seal, and it's going to say Hawaii on the back. So I was tempted to separate these between North Africa and Hawaii and call them two different things, but I decided I was just going to put them all together as emergency currency because that's how they are classified in the book. Is they're classified under World War II emergency currency. So that's the name of that particular. So that's 7, right? 10, 9, 8. Yep, that was number 7. Number 6 on my list. This is going back a little bit. This is an 1882 national currency. And I know I already talked about nationals, but this national is a little different. This national is known as the brownback. These had, I want to say, 5, 10, 20, 50, and 100 for the denominations. But they used brown ink on the back, which was fairly unique as far as the printing process goes. It is a darker red, almost a maroon seal. You can see how dark red, almost maroon, almost a blood red that they use compared to the normal color red that you see right here. This particular $20 bill was from Decatur, Illinois. So these followed the same rules as nationals, but the brownbacks, well, when national currency charters were issued, those charters were good for 20 years. After their 20 years, the feds would go out and check on the bank and make sure everything was still cool. And if everything was good and they wanted to continue their charter from their first charter to the second charter where people were renewing, they got the brownbacks. That's where that came from. So the brownback, like I said, as soon as you say brownback, everybody knows that you're talking about the second series charters of national currency. That would be the brownback from 1882 to 1902. That is number 6, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Number 5, going way back. This rough piece of paper is a long time ago. We're talking, you can see the date right here, 1770. This predates our country. This is colonial currency. Now, before the United States was the United States, we were, of course, 13 colonies, and we were colonies for quite some time. I mean, the U.S. was settled, well, I don't want to say it was settled in 1492, but soon thereafter. So for well over 100 years, we had stuff going on in this country, and the different colonies would use currency like this. And all of those currencies are considered colonial currencies. Colonial meaning the colonies themselves. So colonial currency was in service, I want to say, from the early 1700s all the way up until the Revolutionary War. And that's pretty much what they look like. You can see they are hand signed, they are hand numbered. This one's in really rough shape. Trying to read it is extremely difficult. But they do use Old English where you have F's instead of S's. So even trying to read it is a little difficult unless you're familiar seeing that. So that is the colonial set. Let's see. Number 4 on the list. First we had the colonials, then once the Revolutionary War started, we put together the Continental Congress and the Continental Army, meaning we changed our money to the continental currency. Continental currency, this here is, if I zoom in here, you can see the Act of the 14th of January, 1779. This is a $50 bill. You can see it's hand numbered. You can see it's hand signed. And you can see, trying to read this one, it does say United States across the top, which is really cool to have a note from 1779 referencing the United States. That is really cool. But it says here the bearer is entitled to receive 50 Spanish milled dollars or an equal sum in gold or silver according to a resolution of Congress of the 14th January 1779, $50. And yes, you can see that there's a lot of F's instead of S's in there. Don't get it, I don't understand, but that's how they did it, so I'm going with it. That is number 4 on the list, Continentals. Number 3, 1869, if I remember right. In 1869, the series that came out, this was the first series for these, and these were known as rainbows. There's the 1, the 2, the 5, the 10, the 20. I'm not sure if they had the higher denominations. I'm pretty sure they did. But the rainbow notes. Now you can see that they go from a blue background to a green background. It just kind of like does a rainbow pattern essentially. And then when you add in the red seal like that and the red numbers, it's just a really striking note. Now the rainbows were only around till about 1880. Once the 1880 series started, then they started to do away with the background. They kept the same imagery. In fact, this particular imagery on this bill went all the way until 1917 on the $2 bill, if I remember correctly. But it just didn't have the rainbow pattern. So the rainbow pattern itself, that was from 1869. So when someone talks about rainbows, these are what they're talking about. Like I said, not necessarily a $2 bill, but the 1869 series in and of itself has that rainbow pattern. That's number 3 on my list. Number 2. This is actually where it all started. Now, I am misquoted. Well, I misquote all the time saying that 1862 is the first series that was put out. It's not true. Actually, in 1861, the U.S. government put out what were called demand notes. These demand notes weren't out for very long, but the demand notes were in $5, $10, and $20 denominations only. And this was the first time that you saw actual notes like this put into circulation. Now they only made, what did I read, $60 million worth of these notes total. And when you're talking, most of those were $10 and $20 denominations. That doesn't leave for a whole lot of notes to be made in the first place. But anyway, the 1861 demand note has a nickname you may have heard of, and the nickname has to do with the back. They used all this green ink on the back, and this is what got everybody's attention to start with. These notes are known as greenbacks. Now, I'm sure you've heard U.S. currency called greenbacks all the time, but these are the greenbacks, the first notes that were actually put out in 1861. With all of that green ink on there, their nickname became the greenback, and people will call a lot of U.S. currency greenbacks, but this is the note that is referred to as the greenback. This is the cause for all of that, and we still use greenbacks today, or the green on the back today. But this particular note is where it all started. This is the greenbacks. And finally, number 1 on the list. I'm sure many of you could guess. I went with the 1896. Educational series. The educational series features a $1, a $2, and a $5 note, and it was put together to educate the public. Now, in educating the public, the first note was dedicated to history, the second note was dedicated to science and industry, and the third note, the $5 bill, this one here, was dedicated to electricity. Now, when this note came out, it started a huge controversy because everybody said that the central figure wasn't wearing any clothes. So these got yanked immediately. These, like I said, were put out in 1896, and by 1899, we had a whole new series of notes. So when people talk about the educational series, they're talking about the 1, the 2, and the 5 from 1896. A very, very short-lived series, making these notes extremely expensive. And as you can tell, some of the most detailed notes that you will ever see. These look like pictures hanging in an art gallery. Just such an impressive set. But yeah, not any individual note in that series. The entire series is known as the Educational Series. All right, guys, so that's what I've got for you this week. It's the top 10 series with names. If you learned anything new, go ahead and hit that like button. If you like what you see and you want to see more, please subscribe. If you have an idea for a top 10 list, leave that down in the comments as well. If I use your list, I'll make sure to put your name out there so everybody can see who suggested it. Guys, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week.